the Dark One's prison, and the corruption of a perfect world. Good evening, and welcome to the Sleep to Lore series. Tonight, we journey back to a time of myth and legend, an era of profound peace that has been all but erased by the turning of the wheel. We will speak of the Age of Legends, a near-perfect world built on logic, harmony, and a power that could shape reality itself. And we will explore the single, catastrophic event that ended it all, the creation of the boar. This is the story of how a flawless world, in its search for ultimate knowledge, drilled a hole into the prison of the Dark One and unleashed a shadow that would stain creation forever. If you enjoy these long explorations of fictional worlds and find they help you relax and drift away, please consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a comment to let me know. Your support helps this series continue. Before we begin, I have a simple question for you. If you could design a perfect world, what one single rule or principle would be its most important foundation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And now, settle in. Take a deep breath and let your mind drift. We are going back to the beginning of the end to witness the breaking of a paradise. Chapter 1. An Age of Wonders. To understand the fall, you must first understand the height from which the world fell. The Age of Legends was not simply a time of advanced technology and powerful magic. It was a time of fundamentally different thinking. The very concept of a weapon was an archaic thing, a historical curiosity studied by academics in the same way we might study a flint axe head. Crime was not a social problem, but a rare and baffling psychological ailment, treated with compassion and healing. There were no nations, no borders drawn on maps with the blood of soldiers. There was only humanity, a single global civilization dedicated to a shared purpose, the betterment of all and service to the greater good. The world was a garden, and humanity were its thoughtful, gentle keepers. Let us imagine walking through a city from that time. The name that echoes down through the ages is Paran-Dissen. Imagine a city without corners. The buildings rose not in sharp angles of steel and stone, but in gentle flowing curves of a material that seemed to be captured light. During the day, these structures, made of a substance called ogier stone, or woven directly from the One Power, would drink in the sunlight and glow with a soft internal warmth. At night, they released this light, bathing the streets in a silver and gold luminescence that felt alive. This was a city that breathed with the planet. Parks were not small, sectioned off squares of green, but vast, flowing rivers of nature that wound through the entire metropolis. Great trees, centuries old, were not obstacles to be cut down, but sacred pillars around which entire districts were designed. Walkways spiraled up their massive trunks, and homes were nestled among their high branches, offering views of the entire shimmering cityscape. There was no sound of combustion engines, no roar of traffic. Transportation was silent and graceful. Small personal vehicles called Joe cars floated on cushions of the One Power, gliding along designated aerial pathways a few feet above the ground. They moved with the silence of a falling leaf. For longer distances, one might take a show wing, a larger craft that soared high in the atmosphere, its graceful wings catching the air currents as it was guided by the unseen forces of the power. Travel was not a chore, but an experience, a chance to see the world from the vantage point of a bird. The air was clean, carrying only the scent of blossoms from the rooftop gardens and the fresh smell of rain on the crystalline streets. People moved without hurry, their faces open and serene. The frantic, desperate energy that defines so much of modern life was simply absent. There was nothing to rush toward that was more important than the present moment. The society itself operated on principles that would seem alien to us. There was no money. What need was there for currency when all needs were met? Food was plentiful, grown by Aes Sedai, who could sing to the fields, encouraging crops to grow with astonishing speed and vitality. Homes were constructed for those who needed them, designed to be places of beauty and peace. If you desired an object, a piece of art, a tool for your hobby, you simply requested it. The idea of hoarding wealth or possessions for status was considered a strange and pointless eccentricity. A person's value was not measured by what they owned, but by what they contributed. And contribution was not a burden, it was a joy. People did not have jobs in the way we understand them. They had callings. A person might spend their life mastering the flute, and their music would be shared freely in public squares and halls for all to enjoy. Another might dedicate their life to botany, developing new kinds of flowers with impossible colours and fragrances. Another still might be a storyteller, weaving tales that could be experienced by others as vivid shared dreams. The goal of life was to find your passion and pursue it to its fullest, because the fruits of that passion would enrich the lives of everyone. This was the core philosophy: service to all. It was not a law enforced by any government, but a deep cultural understanding. To help others, to create beauty, to discover knowledge, this was the highest purpose one could achieve. This peace was so profound, so deeply ingrained, that even the darker aspects of human nature seemed to have faded away. Envy was a rarity when everyone's life was filled with purpose and comfort. Greed was pointless in a world without scarcity. Anger was an emotion that was quickly soothed by healers who could literally mend the anxieties of the mind as easily as they could set a broken bone. The world was not just peaceful on the surface, it was peaceful to its very core. It was a society that had, over millennia, solved the problems of survival and was now free to simply live. Even in this perfect world, there were those who held positions of great respect and authority. They were not kings or presidents, but the Aes Sedai. In the Age of Legends, this term, which means servants of all in the old tongue, was not exclusive to women. It referred to any man or woman who could channel the One Power. The One Power was the energy that drove the universe, the force the Creator had used to turn the wheel of time. It was divided into two halves, two forces that were opposite and yet complementary. Sidar, the female half of the power, was a river. To channel it, a woman had to open herself to it, to surrender and guide its immense, placid, and yet overwhelmingly powerful current. Saidin, the male half, was a raging, filthy torrent. To channel it, a man had to seize it, to dominate it, to fight it into submission with every fibre of his being. In this age, men and women worked together in perfect harmony. Their differences were not a source of conflict, but of strength. A man and a woman, linked, could weave the two halves of the power together to create wonders that neither could achieve alone. They could raise mountains, divert rivers, and build those shimmering cities from nothing but air and energy. They were the architects, the engineers, the doctors, and the artists of this golden age. An Aes Sedai healer, known then as a restorer, could mend any injury, cure any disease. They could knit flesh and bone back together with weaves of spirit and water, untangle the frayed nerves of a troubled mind, and grant people lives that were long, healthy, and free from physical suffering. An Aes Sedai grower could walk into a desert and, with songs and weaves of earth and water, make it bloom into a lush forest overnight. They ensured that famine was a forgotten word. The Aes Sedai were not a separate ruling class. They lived among the people, and their great power was governed by an absolute commitment to service. The symbol of the Aes Sedai in that age was a circle, half white and half black, separated by a sinuous line. It represented the two halves of the power, forever separate but forever touching, balanced in perfect equilibrium. It was a symbol of the harmony that defined their entire world. The training of an Aes Sedai was not a harsh ordeal. Young people who showed the ability to channel were guided gently, taught to embrace the power as a part of themselves. They were taught ethics and philosophy with the same intensity as the weaving of the power itself. The core lesson was that this immense force was not theirs to own, but a gift to be used for the benefit of all life. Imagine being one of these Aes Sedai. Imagine the feeling of drawing on the life force of the universe, For a woman, it would be like opening a floodgate within her soul, a warm, blissful rush of pure life energy that she could then shape with her mind. For a man, it would be a battle, a violent, breathtaking struggle against a force that threatened to consume him, but a struggle that, when won, filled him with an ecstatic sense of ultimate power and control. And imagine standing next to your opposite, feeling their power as a tangible presence, and weaving your threads of light and energy together with theirs. You could feel their thoughts, their intentions, as you jointly created something new. A bridge of pure, solid light. A cloud that would deliver rain only where it was needed. A melody woven from the power itself that could bring joy to thousands. This was the reality of the Aes Sedai. They were not sorcerers hiding in towers, but public servants revered for their wisdom and their gifts. At the head of the Aes Sedai, and by extension, the entire global society, was a figure elected to the post of first among servants. This individual was the most respected, the wisest, and often the most powerful channeler of the age. During the final days of this era, that title was held by a man named Luz Therin Telemon. He was known as the Dragon. In that age, the title of Dragon was not one of fear, but of immense honor. He was a man of incredible power, but also of incredible compassion and wisdom. He was the embodiment of the ideals of the Age of Legends. He was a leader who led by example, a servant who served all. This entire idyllic existence, this perfectly balanced world, was built on millennia of progress. But with progress comes ambition. After solving all the problems of the physical world, the great minds of the Age of Legends turned their attention to the fundamental questions of existence. They sought to understand the very fabric of reality, the nature of the Creator, and the essence of the One Power itself. And it was here, in this noble and intellectual pursuit, that the first seeds of their destruction were sown. The central scientific and philosophical quest of the late Age of Legends was the search for a unified power source. The One Power, for all its magnificence, was divided. Saidin and Saidar, male and female. A man could not touch the female half, and a woman could not touch the male half. While they could work together, they could never truly share the same experience. The greatest researchers and thinkers of the age saw this division as the universe's last great puzzle, its final imperfection. They theorized that there must be a single, universal power source from which both Saidin and Saidar were derived. A power that men and women could access together equally. A power without division. To find this power would be the ultimate achievement of their civilization. It would be a gift of perfect unity to all future generations. This quest was not born of greed or a lust for more power. They already had all the power they could ever need. It was born of pure, unadulterated curiosity. It was the final mountain to be climbed, the last mystery to be solved. And the center of this research was a great university, a place of learning and discovery known as the Kolam Dan. It was located in a beautiful city called Visain. The Kolam Dan was a stunning sight, a collection of shimmering spires and floating laboratories where the most brilliant minds of the age gathered to push the boundaries of knowledge. The air there crackled with intellectual energy. Debates on metaphysics and quantum realities were as common as conversations about the weather. At the forefront of this ambitious project were two Aes Sedai researchers. The leader was a woman named Mirin Eronaile. Mirin was considered one of the most brilliant minds of her time, or any time. She was beautiful, charismatic, and possessed an intellect that could unravel the most complex cosmological theories. She was universally respected and admired, but deep within her, hidden beneath the veneer of a perfect servant of all, was a sliver of pride. She did not just want to contribute, she wanted her contribution to be the greatest of all. She wanted a legacy that would echo through eternity. Her partner in this research was a man named Beidamon. He was also a brilliant researcher, though perhaps less visionary than Mirin. He was methodical, dedicated, and utterly devoted to the project and to Mirin herself. Together, they formed a formidable team. For years, they worked tirelessly. They used instruments of incredible sophistication, devices that could perceive the subtle vibrations of the pattern, the great cosmic loom that wove all of reality. They scanned the universe, searching for any sign of this theoretical universal power. They formulated endless theories, ran countless experiments, and found nothing. The division between Saidin and Saidar seemed to be an absolute fundamental law of their existence. Any lesser minds might have given up, concluding that their theory was simply wrong. But Mirin's ambition would not let her rest. She pushed her team harder, convinced that they were just missing something, looking in the wrong place. And then, one day, they found it. It was not what they expected. Their instruments did not detect a new power source within the known universe, within the confines of the pattern. Instead, they detected something else. A strange anomaly, an energy reading that seemed to come from nowhere. It was a power source of immense, almost infinite magnitude, but it existed outside of everything. It was as if their entire reality was a single, tightly woven tapestry, and just beyond the last thread, separated by a metaphysical barrier of infinitesimal thinness, was a vast, dark ocean of raw power. The excitement at the Kolam Dan was immense. This was the breakthrough they had been searching for. Their theory had been both right and wrong. The unified power source existed, but it was not a part of their world. It was a separate, external force. Mirin and Baidamon theorized that this was the very power the Creator had used in the beginning. By tapping into it, they could bypass the division of Saidin and Saidar and give humanity access to a power that was truly limitless. The potential was staggering. They could reshape worlds, travel to other stars in an instant, perhaps even achieve true immortality. It would be the dawn of a new age, an age even more glorious than their own. They carefully studied the barrier separating their reality from this new power source. It was incredibly resilient, but their instruments indicated a specific point where it seemed weaker, a thinness in the fabric of the pattern. It was here, at this specific coordinate in space-time, located near the university itself, that they could, in theory, drill a small, precise hole. A microscopic channel that would allow them to access and study the energy on the other side. Mirin Eronaila prepared a grand proposal to be delivered to the Hall of the Servants, the governing body of the Aes Sedai. She detailed their discovery, the nature of the external power source, and their plan to carefully tap into it. Her presentation was a masterpiece of rhetoric and science. She painted a glorious picture of the future, a future of limitless potential, all made possible by this one final breakthrough. The excitement was contagious. The hall was filled with the most powerful and intelligent people in the world, and they were captivated by her vision. There were, however, a few voices of caution. Some of the older, more philosophically minded Aes Sedai raised concerns. They argued that if the Creator had placed this power source outside of the pattern, there was likely a very good reason for it. To breach that barrier, no matter how carefully, was an act of extreme arrogance. It was tampering with the fundamental structure of creation, meddling with things that were perhaps never meant to be known, let alone used. They warned that they did not know what this power was, or what consequences tapping into it might have. Why risk their perfect world for a power they did not even need? It was a solution in search of a problem. But these voices of caution were few, and they were easily dismissed. The overwhelming mood was one of optimism and excitement. The arguments against the project sounded like superstition, like a fear of the unknown. And the people of the Age of Legends had conquered the unknown. They had tamed their world and believed they could tame the universe itself. Mirin skillfully countered the objections, framing them as a failure of imagination, a clinging to old limitations in the face of a new and glorious dawn. The vote was held, and the proposal was approved by a vast majority. The project was given the full backing of the Hall of the Servants. The preparations began immediately. A massive, specialized laboratory was constructed at the precise location of the thinness in the pattern. The most powerful and skilled Aes Sedai from all over the world were brought in to assist. It was the single largest scientific undertaking in history. The energy required for the experiment would be immense, requiring a circle of the strongest male and female channelers working in concert to provide the necessary power. The mood was electric. They were standing on the precipice of history, about to give the world and the universe its greatest gift. They were confident, they were brilliant, and they were utterly tragically wrong. They believed they were about to open a door to a new heaven. They were, in fact, about to drill a hole into the wall of a prison that held a being of pure malevolent consciousness, a being whose very existence was the antithesis of everything their world stood for, a being known as Shaitan, the Dark One. The world held its breath in anticipation of a miracle, unaware that it was about to witness the beginning of its own long, horrifying death. The sun shone brightly on the beautiful spires of Visain, a perfect day for the end of a perfect world. Chapter 2. The Whisper at the Seam. The day of the experiment dawned clear and bright over the city of Visain. In the specialized laboratory built for this single, momentous purpose, the air was still and cool, filled with the low, almost sub-audible hum of energies being held in perfect stasis. This was not a place of clanking machinery or flashing lights. The technology of the Age of Legends was seamless and elegant. The walls themselves were part of the apparatus, woven with conduits of the one power that glowed with a soft internal light. At the center of the vast circular chamber was the focal point of the entire endeavor. It did not look like a drill or a weapon. It was a large, perfectly clear crystal lens, suspended in the air by invisible weaves of air and spirit. It was designed to gather and concentrate an unimaginable amount of the one power, focusing it into a beam finer than a single human hair. Mierin Erinail stood on the observation platform, looking down at the final preparations. Her face, usually a mask of serene confidence, was alight with a feverish excitement. This was her moment, the culmination of her life's work. Generations to come would speak her name with the same reverence they held for the Creator. She would be the woman who had unlocked the universe's final secret. Beside her, Badamon was checking a series of floating crystalline panels, his brow furrowed in concentration. His energy was different from hers. It was the nervous, meticulous energy of a man who understood the thousand things that could go wrong, while Mierin only saw the one thing she was determined would go right. Around the central chamber, in designated alcoves, sat the Circle. This was not just any group of Aes Sedai. They were the 100 strongest channelers in the world, 50 men and 50 women, brought together for the sole purpose of powering this one event. The men fought to control the raging torrent of Sidene, a visible sheen of sweat on their faces, even in the cool air, the air around them seeming to shimmer with contained power. The women had surrendered to the calm, endless river of Sidar, their expressions placid, yet their bodies were conduits for a force that could level mountains. The two halves of the one power, male and female, were being drawn in quantities never before attempted. The raw forces were then channeled into the great lens, which hummed and began to glow, the light within it shifting from soft white to a blinding silver. Mierin gave the final command. Her voice, amplified by a subtle weave of air, was clear and steady, betraying none of the triumphant pounding of her heart. The process began. The lead channelers in the circle began to weave the intricate web of forces that would guide the beam. It was a task of unimaginable complexity, like threading a needle from a mile away in a hurricane. But they were the masters of their age, and the work was flawless. A single, pure beam of white light, thinner than a spider's thread, shot from the lens, striking a specific point in the empty air before it. There was no sound. There was no impact. The beam simply touched a point in space and disappeared. For a long moment, nothing happened. The beam poured into that single point, a river of cosmic energy flowing into an unseen crack in reality. The channelers strained, their concentration absolute. Mirin watched, her breath held. Baderman monitored his instruments, his eyes wide. The readings were escalating, climbing to levels they had only dreamed of in their theoretical models. The power drain was immense, but the barrier was holding. It was resisting. Then, Mirin gave another command, her voice sharper this time. Increase the flow. Maximum yield. The circle of Aes Sedai complied. The men grunted with the strain as they seized more of saidin. The women's serenity became a mask of intense focus as they opened themselves wider to saidar. The light from the central lens flared, becoming so bright it was painful to look at. And then, it happened. It was not an explosion. There was no cataclysmic roar or shattering of reality. It was a silent, horrifying success. At the point where the beam vanished, a new spot appeared. It was a circle of perfect, absolute blackness. It was no larger than a coin, but it was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. It was not the black of a shadow or the dark of a starless night. It was a hungry black, a void that did not reflect light but consumed it. The brilliant beam from the lens touched its edge and was simply gone, adding nothing to its emptiness. The moment the black spot appeared, a change swept through the laboratory. A profound, unnatural cold dropped the temperature by 20 degrees in a second. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the air, a spiritual chill that sank into their bones and made their souls feel brittle. The low hum of the power conduit ceased, replaced by a dead, oppressive silence, and a feeling of profound and utter wrongness. It was a sense of violation, as if they had walked in on a sacred ritual or broken a taboo so fundamental it was woven into the fabric of their souls. Every instinct they possessed screamed at them that they had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. On the observation deck, Baderman stumbled back, his face pale. Mirin, shut it down now, he choked out. But Mirin was transfixed, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Her instruments were going wild. The readings from the other side of that black hole were infinite. It was the power source they had dreamed of. They had done it. No, she breathed, her voice a strange, rapturous whisper. It's beautiful. But down in the circle, the channelers were beginning to falter. The feeling of wrongness was washing over them, disrupting their concentration. The men felt the taint of that place touching saidin, making the already difficult power feel greasy and foul. The women felt the purity of saidar recoil from the unnatural presence. The perfect harmony of the circle was breaking. A young female channeler screamed and collapsed, the flow of saidar she was guiding snapping back with vicious force. Her scream broke the spell. Panic began to ripple through the room. Finally, Baderman, overriding Mirin's fascinated stare, shouted the emergency command. Release the weaves! All of you! Now! With ragged unison, the remaining 99 channelers severed their connection to the central lens. The brilliant beam of light vanished. The black spot in the air remained for a moment longer, a perfect circle of nothing, before it seemed to contract and wink out of existence. But it was not gone. They had not closed the hole. They had simply stopped looking through it. The bore had been drilled. The prison wall of the Dark One was breached, and in that moment of silent, cold violation, the fate of the Age of Legends was sealed. In the hours and days that followed the experiment, a fierce debate raged within the Columdan and the Hall of the Servants. Baderman and a growing number of those present at the experiment argued that they had touched something malevolent, something that should have been left alone. They described the unnatural chill, the sense of a conscious, hateful presence on the other side of the bore. They advocated for the entire project to be abandoned and for all research to be focused on finding a way to seal the breach, if such a thing was even possible. Mirin, however, used all of her charisma and political skill to counter them. She presented the data from her instruments, which showed unequivocally that they had found a limitless source of energy. She dismissed the feelings of dread and cold as a purely psychological reaction to a new and powerful phenomenon. the primitive part of their brains reacting with fear to something it could not understand. She argued that to turn back now, to shrink away from the greatest discovery in history out of baseless fear, would be an act of cowardice. She was convincing. Most of the Aes Sedai had not been there. They had not felt that soul-deepening chill. All they had were the reports, and Mirin's data-driven, optimistic report was far more appealing than Baidamon's fearful, anecdotal warnings. And so, a compromise was reached. The experiment would be temporarily halted, but the bore would not be sealed. Further, smaller-scale studies would be conducted to analyze the nature of the new energy source before any attempts were made to draw upon it again. Mirin publicly agreed, appearing gracious and reasonable. Inwardly, she was furious at the delay, but confident she could sway opinion back to her side. She, and most of the world, believed the crisis had been averted and that caution had won the day. They did not understand that the damage was already done. The Dark One was not a force that needed to be actively drawn upon. The bore was not a doorway that needed to be opened. It was a wound. And through that wound, the Dark One's consciousness, its very essence, was now able to seep into the world like a slow, colourless poison. The first effects were not obvious. There were no monsters crawling from the earth, no armies marching on the cities. The corruption was far more insidious. It was a taint on the pattern itself, a subtle wrongness that began to fray the edges of their perfect world. It began as a series of disconnected, baffling incidents, so small they were barely noticed. A master musician, known for his flawless performances, would find a single jarringly sour note creeping into his composition for no reason he could explain. A batch of perfectly preserved food in a storage facility would be found to have rotted, covered in a strange, oily mold. People began to have nightmares, not terrifying visions of monsters, but unsettling dreams filled with anxiety and a vague sense of being watched. These small physical anomalies were strange, but the more profound corruption was happening within the human heart. It was a poison for the soul. Consider a man who had spent his life as an architect, one of the many who helped design the flowing, beautiful structures of Paradisen. His greatest joy had always been collaboration, sharing his ideas with his peers, delighting in their combined genius. One morning, he woke with a new thought in his head. While reviewing a colleague's plan for a new public garden, a plan he would normally have praised, he felt a sharp, bitter pang. It was the thought, my design would have been better. He felt a sudden urge to find flaws in his colleague's work, to diminish it, so that his own would seem greater by comparison. The feeling was so alien, so ugly, that he was deeply ashamed of it. He pushed it down, but it lingered, a small dark stain on his thoughts. This was the first time in his long life he had ever felt professional jealousy. Or imagine a restorer, an Aes Sedai healer, working in a hospital. Her patient was a woman suffering from a deep, lingering grief that manifested as physical pain. The restorer's job was to gently soothe the woman's mind, to use weaves of spirit and water to untangle the knots of sorrow. It was a long, delicate process requiring immense patience. But on this day, as the patient wept quietly, the restorer felt a sudden, shocking surge of irritation. Why can't she just get over it? The thought hissed in her mind. She is wasting my time. The coldness of the thought horrified her. The core of her being, the very essence of a healer, was compassion. This flash of cruel impatience was like a foreign invader in her own head. These were not isolated incidents. All over the world, these small seeds of darkness were beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of the human psyche. A scholar, dedicated to the pursuit of truth, found a strange pleasure in telling a small unnecessary lie. Two lifelong friends, engaged in a philosophical debate, suddenly found themselves attacking each other personally, their words turning from tools of exploration into weapons of cruelty. Greed, a concept that was little more than a historical footnote, began to reappear. A man might see a beautiful sculpture and feel not just appreciation, but a possessive desire to own it, to keep it for himself so no one else could enjoy it. It was a slow, creeping plague of negative emotion. Ambition curdled into ruthless pride. Love was tainted by suspicion. Contentment was eroded by a new, gnawing dissatisfaction. The utopian society of the Age of Legends was built on a foundation of absolute trust and empathy. The Dark One's influence was a solvent, slowly and methodically dissolving that foundation. People became just a little more selfish, a little more suspicious, a little more prone to anger. The perfect harmony of their world began to develop a slight, almost imperceptible dissonance. At first, these incidents were treated as individual psychological problems. The people experiencing these new, dark emotions were often horrified by them and sought healing. But the restorers found that they could not heal this ailment. They could soothe the anxiety it caused, but they could not remove the underlying stain. It was as if the very definition of human nature was being subtly rewritten. The capacity for casual cruelty, for selfishness and hate, was being amplified, while the capacity for empathy and selflessness was being muted. The world did not fall into chaos overnight. It was a slow decay, a gradual cooling of the warmth that had defined their age. Conversations became a little more guarded. The easy, open trust between strangers was replaced by a slight hesitation, a flicker of assessment in the eyes. The philosophy of service to all was still preached, but it was practiced with a little less genuine joy. The perfect machine of their society was still running, but there was a new friction in its gears, a fine grit grinding away at its delicate components. Some began to see the pattern. The few Aes Sedai who had first warned against the Boar project started to connect the strange physical decay with the slow moral decay. They saw that the world was sick, suffering from a spiritual disease. They brought their concerns to the Hall of the Servants again, but they were met with skepticism and denial. To admit they were right would be to admit that Mirin had been wrong, that the world's most brilliant minds had committed an act of catastrophic folly. The inertia of pride was too great. The leadership of the Aes Sedai publicly maintained that all was well, even as the world around them was slowly, quietly beginning to rot from the inside out. And as the world grew colder, the whispers began. The Dark One was not just a passive force of corruption. It was a conscious, intelligent being of infinite malice. And it could speak. It did not speak with a voice of thunder from the heavens. Its voice was a subtle, insidious whisper in the back of the mind, a temptation perfectly tailored to the listener's own secret desires and hidden flaws. For most people, this whisper was faint, easily dismissed as a stray, dark thought. But for those with great ambition, great pride, or great power, the whisper was clearer. It was seductive. It promised them everything their society had taught them was worthless. It promised personal power, not to serve, but to rule. It promised wealth, not to be shared, but to be hoarded. It promised immortality, a life everlasting, breaking free from the turning of the wheel. It spoke to the artist and promised him that he alone would be seen as a genius and all others would be forgotten. It spoke to the scholar and promised him secret knowledge, truth so profound and dangerous that they were kept from the masses. It spoke to the lover and promised to deliver the object of their affection by force if necessary. It preyed on every crack, every flaw, every hidden insecurity in the human heart. It offered a simple, intoxicating bargain. Serve me, and I will give you everything you have ever secretly wanted. Many heard the whisper and recoiled in horror. They sought healing, they strengthened their minds, and they fought it. But some listened. Some were intrigued. In a world of perfect equality, the promise of being superior was a powerful lure. In a society of selfless service, the idea of ultimate selfishness was a thrilling, forbidden fantasy. The whispers found fertile ground in the hearts of those who had always felt deep down that they were better than everyone else, that they deserved more. And no one heard the whisper more clearly or more eagerly than the woman who had opened the door in the first place, Mirin Eronela. In the weeks after the experiment, as she publicly defended her actions and fought to restart her research, she was privately wrestling with a new reality. The whisper came to her in her dreams. At first, it was a voice of pure validation. It praised her ambition. It told her that her desire for a legacy was not a flaw, but a sign of her superiority. The others, with their talk of caution and service, were small-minded, it said. They were holding humanity back, while she, Mirin, was trying to lead them into a glorious new future. She found these dreams intoxicating. They fed the part of her she had always kept hidden, the part that chafed under the philosophy of selfless service. She had always felt she was special, and here was a voice from beyond the veil of the world confirming it. The voice began to show her visions. It showed her worlds burning at her command. It showed her armies of strange, monstrous creatures kneeling before her. It showed her other Aes Sedai, her peers and rivals, bowing at her feet, their faces filled with terror and awe. And it spoke to her greatest secret weakness, her unrequited love for Luz Therin Telamon. Luz Therin, the dragon, was the most powerful and respected man of the age. Mirin loved him, or at least she coveted him. She saw him as her equal, the only man worthy of standing beside her. But Luz Therin was married to another woman, Ilyena, and their love was legendary. Mirin's admiration for Luz Therin was twisted with a bitter, secret jealousy. The voice in her dreams preyed on this masterfully. It told her that Luz Therin's rejection of her was a fool's choice. It promised her that when the new age dawned, Luz Therin would be hers. The whisper promised to break him, to shatter his will and his love for Ilyena, and deliver him to Mirin as a prize, a broken toy for her to play with for all eternity. This was the promise that finally sealed her fate. The idea of possessing the dragon, of forcing the world's greatest man to acknowledge her superiority, was a temptation she could not resist. She stopped fighting the whisper. She began to welcome it, to converse with it. She asked it what it was. It told her it was Shaitan, the great lord of the dark, the true master of reality. The pattern and the creator were a lie, a prison for the strong, and he had come to set them free. Mirin made her choice. She did not fall to the shadow in a moment of weakness. She walked toward it, with her eyes wide open, convinced she was choosing a greater destiny. In the quiet of her own mind, she knelt and swore the eternal, binding oaths of fealty to the great Lord of the Dark. She renounced her old life, her old name, and the entire philosophy of her world. The moment she did, she felt a change. A new, exhilarating power flowed into her, cold and sharp and intoxicating. It was a power separate from the one power, a gift from her new master, and with it came a new name, whispered into her soul. Mirin Eronail was dead. She was now Lanfear, the daughter of the night. She awoke from her dream not as a servant of all, but as a queen of shadow. She walked out into the world, her beautiful face a perfect mask of her old self, but behind her eyes was a new cold fire. She was the first of the Forsaken, the first great mind to willingly and eagerly embrace the darkness. And her first task, given to her by her master, was simple. Find others. Find the proud, the ambitious, the greedy, and the cruel, and show them the true path to power. The corruption of the world was no longer a slow, random decay. It now had a general. The whispers now had a voice on the inside, and the age of legends had taken its first, definitive step toward the long, bloody twilight of the War of Power. Chapter 3: The Shattered Prism. The world was no longer simply flawed, it was fractured. The creation of the boar had been a hairline crack in a perfect crystal sphere. The subtle corruption that followed was the slow, creeping spread of that fracture, invisible to a casual glance, but weakening the entire structure from within. Now, with the turning of Lanfear, the first of the Forsaken, a hammer had struck the crystal. The fractures were no longer hidden. They splintered across the surface of reality, and the beautiful, unified image of their world was beginning to shatter into 1,000 sharp-edged pieces. The poison seeping from the Dark One's prison now had a willing agent, a brilliant and charismatic mind dedicated to spreading the infection with purpose and strategy. The slow, random decay was about to become a calculated, deliberate demolition. Lanfear did not declare herself to the world. That would have been crude and inefficient. The path to power was not through open confrontation, not yet. It was through the conversion of the powerful, the seduction of the influential. She knew the hearts of her peers at the highest levels of the Aes Sedai. She had worked with them, debated with them, and served with them for centuries. She knew their strengths, but more importantly, she knew their hidden weaknesses, the secret vanities and ambitions they concealed beneath their masks of selfless service. These were the cracks she would exploit. The great Lord of the Dark whispered promises to the world at random, but Lanfear could walk up to a person, look them in the eye, and make a promise she knew they were already desperate to hear. Her first target was a mind she considered almost her equal, a man whose intellect was so profound that it bordered on the divine. His name was Ellen Morin Tedroni. He was not a scientist or a builder. He was a philosopher, a theologian of the highest order. His life's work was the study of the grand cosmology, the nature of the Creator, the purpose of the wheel of time, and the fundamental conflict between what the world called the light and the shadow. He was respected for his brilliant mind, but he was also considered remote, detached from the mundane concerns of others. His search for truth was absolute, untainted by emotion or sentiment. It was this very intellectual purity that would be his downfall. For years, Ilan Morin had wrestled with a terrifying philosophical paradox. The wheel of time turned, ages came and went in a repeating cycle. Civilizations rose to great heights and then fell to ruin, only to rise again in a new form. It was an endless, grinding loop. The Creator, it seemed, had set this loop in motion and then taken no further part in it. The Dark One, however, was an active force, constantly pushing against creation, constantly seeking to break the wheel and remake reality. In this cosmic battle, the forces of the light were always playing defense. They fought not to win, but simply to keep from losing, to ensure the wheel could turn one more time. The shadow, on the other hand, only had to win once. One single, decisive victory, and the wheel would be broken forever. The game was, from his perspective, fundamentally rigged. The whispers of the Dark One came to Ilan Morin not as temptations of wealth or power, but as philosophical arguments. They were affirmations of his own bleak conclusions. The voice in his mind confirmed his deepest fear. The struggle was futile. The Creator was apathetic, while the Dark One was passionate. The wheel was a prison, and life was a meaningless cycle of suffering, punctuated by brief moments of peace that were destined to be consumed by the next turn of the shadow. He saw the slow decay of his own perfect age as just one more piece of evidence. Even at the pinnacle of its achievement, humanity was doomed to fall. The corruption was inevitable. Lanfear approached him not as a seductress, but as a fellow intellectual. She engaged him in the very debates he was having in his own mind. She did not ask for his loyalty to the shadow. She asked for his loyalty to logic. "Look at the world," she argued, her voice calm and reasonable. "Look at the evidence. We created a paradise, and a single moment of curiosity has begun to unravel it. Does this seem like a system designed for a lasting victory of the light? Or does it seem like a flawed design destined to fail?" She fed his intellectual pride, praising him as the only one with the courage to see the truth that others, blinded by hope and sentiment, refused to acknowledge. The final piece of his conversion was the promise of an escape from the endless cycle. The Dark One, the whisper told him, offered an end to the meaningless repetition. It offered a final resolution, a true eternity in a new creation shaped by will, not by the mindless turning of a cosmic wheel. To fight for the light was to fight for the continuation of a pointless struggle. To fight for the shadow was to fight for an ending. It was the only rational choice for a being who understood the true, hopeless nature of existence. Elan Moran Tedronai wrestled with this conclusion in the cold silence of his study. He looked at all his life's work, all his theories, and saw that they all pointed to this one, terrible truth. He did not fall to the shadow in a moment of passion or greed. He surrendered to it as a philosopher surrenders to an undeniable proof. He swore his oaths to the great Lord of the Dark, not out of a desire for power, but out of a sense of grim, intellectual inevitability. He cast aside his old name and took a new one that meant betrayer of hope in the old tongue. Ishmael. He would become the Shadow's greatest strategist and general, a man whose every action was guided by the cold, unshakable conviction that he was on the only side that could ever truly win. While Lanfear and Ishmael represented the seduction of the mind and the soul, the Shadow also needed those who could corrupt the body. The next to be chosen was a man named Ishar Morad Chwain. He was the world's foremost biologist, a genius in the fields of genetics and life sciences. He had dedicated his long life to understanding and perfecting living things, but he had grown to resent the very world he served. The Age of Legends was governed by a strict code of ethics, especially regarding biological research. Experimentation on sentient life was forbidden. The sanctity of the individual was absolute. To Ishar Morad, these ethics were not a moral guide. They were chains. He saw them as a foolish, sentimental barrier to true progress. What marvels could he create if he was free from these childish restrictions? The whisper that came to him was one of pure, unrestrained freedom. It did not speak of ruling the world, but of creating new worlds of flesh. It promised him an unlimited budget, unlimited resources, and most importantly, a complete absence of morality. He could do anything he wanted. He could combine species, twist genetics, and design new forms of life for any purpose he saw fit. He dreamed of creating the perfect soldier, a creature that blended the strength of a beast with the cunning of a man. He dreamed of creating the perfect assassin, a being of shadow and fear. His work had been about preserving life, but his secret passion was the power to shape it into whatever form he desired, no matter how monstrous. Lanfear approached him with a simple, direct offer. "The world you know is dying," she told him. "A new world is coming, a world of strength and power. The Great Lord needs architects of this new world. He needs creators who are not afraid to get their hands dirty." She offered him laboratories where he could conduct the experiments he had only ever dared to imagine. She offered him an endless supply of subjects, raw genetic material to be molded by his genius. Ishar Morad did not hesitate for long. The temptation was too great. The chance to finally unleash his full, untethered intellect was a prize worth any price. He swore himself to the Shadow, and in return, he was given the resources to begin his dark work. In secret, deep beneath the ground, he began to create the armies of the Shadow. He took human stock and blended it with the genetics of animals, wolves, bears, boars, creating a new race of monstrous foot soldiers. They were strong, stupid, and utterly loyal to the dark. He called them Trollocs, and to lead them, he took the most cruel and violent of his creations and twisted them further, creating the Myrddraal, the eyeless, terrifying half-human creatures whose very presence could instill paralyzing fear. Ishar Morad cast aside his old name and became Agenor, the man who would stock the Shadow's legions with the stuff of nightmares. Not all who turned were driven by such grand intellectual or scientific ambitions. Some were driven by far more base desires. Camarile Maradim was a renowned psychologist and a celebrated ascetic. She was beautiful, and she had built her reputation on a philosophy of denying all physical pleasures and worldly attachments. She taught that true peace came from mastering one's desires. But it was all a lie. Inwardly, she was consumed by vanity and a deep-seated contempt for everyone she saw as less beautiful or disciplined than herself. Her asceticism was a performance, a way to prove her superiority over the weak, ugly masses she secretly despised. She craved luxury. She craved physical adoration. And most of all, she craved absolute control over others. The whispers spoke to the hypocrite within her. They promised her a world where she would never have to pretend again, a world where her beauty would be worshipped, and she could surround herself with endless pleasure and luxury. The greatest temptation, however, was the promise of control. She had been a healer of minds. The Dark Lord promised her the power to break them. She could have a collection of human pets, people of great beauty and talent, their wills completely erased, existing only as mindless, beautiful dolls to serve her every whim. Lanfear did not need to persuade her with logic. She simply showed her a vision of this future. She showed Camarillo a palace of impossible opulence, filled with beautiful, empty-eyed servants who adored her without question. Camarillo saw her secret, shameful fantasies made real. She eagerly swore her oaths, casting off her ascetic mask like a despised old cloak. She took the name Grayendal, and she would become a master of compulsion, a seductress who used her beauty and her knowledge of the human mind to turn heroes into her personal playthings. And so it went. One by one, Lanfear and Ishmael identified and turned the most powerful, respected, and secretly flawed individuals of the age. Nemene Damandar Boan, a famous restorer whose fascination with healing had twisted into a depraved curiosity about the nature of pain, became the sadist Semir Haj. Sain Tarasind, a brilliant educator who felt she was never given the respect she deserved, became Messana, who dreamed of turning the great universities into indoctrination centers. Evan Vinchova, a historian who yearned for the raw, carnal pleasures of the past ages, became the hedonist Balthamel. In the end, 13 of the most powerful and influential Aes Sedai of the Age of Legends swore themselves to the shadow. They saw themselves not as traitors, but as pragmatists, as the intelligent few who had chosen the winning side. They called themselves the Chosen. The rest of the world, in the horror that was to come, would give them a different name, the Forsaken. The turning of these 13 figures marked the end of the world's quiet decay and the beginning of its violent, public collapse. The corruption was no longer just a feeling of unease or a series of strange, isolated incidents. It was now a coordinated campaign of sabotage and terror, orchestrated by the world's most brilliant and ruthless minds. The Forsaken did not yet reveal themselves, but their influence was felt everywhere. They used their old positions of trust to tear the world apart from the inside. Agonor's first, less successful creations were secretly released into isolated parts of the world. Strange, twisted animals began to appear in the wilderness, creatures that killed for sport and spread disease. Travelers began to disappear from the ways, the magical transportation network that connected the globe. The stories were dismissed as rumors at first, but they grew more frequent and more horrifying. Mesa Ana, from her position within the educational system, began to subtly alter curriculums. She introduced ideas that fostered doubt and cynicism, undermining the core philosophy of service that had held their society together. She promoted teachers who were subtly selfish and ambitious, and quietly ruined the careers of those who embodied the old ideals. She was not teaching allegiance to the shadow, not yet. She was simply weakening the intellectual and moral immune system of the next generation, making them more susceptible to the coming plague. The most immediate and terrifying impact was on the very structure of daily life. The end of trust was swift and absolute. Imagine a farmer in a remote agricultural center. He relies on a shipment of specialized nutrients for his crops, a shipment scheduled by a trusted administrator 1,000 miles away. But that administrator is now a dark friend, a low-level follower of the Forsaken. The administrator, on a whim of cruelty or on a direct order, simply deletes the shipment from the records. The nutrients never arrive. The crops fail. For the first time in millennia, a community faces the prospect of hunger. The farmer has no one to blame. He knows only that the system he trusted his entire life has failed him. Now, he looks at his neighbors with a new, guarded expression. If the central administration can fail, he must look out for himself and his family first. The ideal of community begins to erode. Now imagine a great public works project, a new bridge being built to connect two communities. The lead architect is one of the world's most respected builders. But he has been turned by Grandal, promised a position of power in the new world. While weaving the supports for the bridge from the one power, a task he has performed flawlessly 1,000 times, he deliberately introduces a subtle, invisible flaw, a weakness in the weave that will only manifest under stress. Weeks later, the bridge is opened with great celebration. It is beautiful, a testament to their age's genius. Then, during a festival with hundreds of people crossing it, the flaw gives way. The bridge of solid light cracks and dissolves into nothing, sending hundreds of innocent people plummeting to their deaths. It is the single greatest loss of life from an accident in centuries. An investigation is launched, but the architect, the trusted hero, is the one leading it. He blames the disaster on a freak seismic event, an unforeseen resonance in the Earth's energy fields. No one suspects sabotage. No one suspects that one of their own heroes could be a monster. But a seed of fear is planted. The world, once so safe and predictable, now seems to contain a new, random element of deadly chaos. The most devastating blow was struck against the Aes Sedai themselves. Semirhage, still posing as a master healer, took on the most difficult cases. A young woman is brought to her, a brilliant artist suffering from a mental block, a form of creative despair. Semirhage uses her incredible skill with the one power to enter the woman's mind. But instead of soothing her and untangling her anxieties, she deliberately shreds her patient's sanity. She twists memories, amplifies fears, and severs the connections to everything that brought the artist joy. The woman leaves Semirhage's care not healed, but as a shattered, empty shell, unable to speak, unable to create, lost in a permanent waking nightmare. When her family and friends see what has become of her, they are horrified. How could a healing from the most renowned restorer in the world go so horribly wrong? This is the true poison of the Forsaken's work. It creates not just death and destruction, but paranoia. The tools of their perfect world, administration, construction, healing, were now being used as weapons against the people. And because the perpetrators were still hidden, still wearing their old faces of trust and authority, people had no one to blame but the system itself. Trust in the Aes Sedai, the bedrock of their society, began to crumble. People started to look at the servants of all with fear. When an Aes Sedai approached, was it to help or to harm? Was the food they grew truly safe? Was the building they designed truly sound? Was the healing they offered a cure or a curse? This suspicion grew into a social plague. The open communal society began to close in on itself. People stopped talking to strangers. Communities became more insular, more guarded. For the first time in memory, people began to lock their doors at night. The global civilization began to fracture back into suspicious, isolated pockets. The Hall of the Servants, the once great governing body, was paralyzed. Every new disaster was met with arguments and accusations. Some, like Luz Therin Telemon, argued that there was a coordinated, malevolent force at work, an enemy they needed to identify and fight. Others accused him of fear-mongering, insisting these were all just a string of terrible, unrelated tragedies. Many were too afraid to voice any opinion at all, terrified that the person they were speaking to could be part of the secret conspiracy. The unity of the Aes Sedai, their greatest strength, was shattered by the acid of mistrust. The perfect harmony between male and female channelers, the very symbol of their age, was broken by suspicion. They stopped working together, each side retreating into its own factions, eyeing the other with fear. Finally, after years of this slow, grinding terror, the Forsaken decided the time was right. The world was sufficiently weakened, confused, and divided. It was time to move from a cold war of sabotage to a hot war of conquest. They revealed themselves. In a coordinated strike, the 13 Forsaken appeared in the great cities of the world. They did not appear as monsters. They appeared as they had always been, as the great and respected leaders of the Age of Legends. And they openly declared their allegiance to the great Lord of the Dark, Shaitan. They proclaimed that the age of the Creator was over, and the age of the Shadow had begun. They offered the world a choice: kneel and serve the new order, or be destroyed. This was the moment of ultimate horror. The monster was not some unknown entity from beyond the stars. The monster was them. It was their heroes, their geniuses, their brightest stars. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it broke the spirit of millions. Many gave in to despair, accepting the Shadow's victory as inevitable. Dark Friend cults, which had been operating in secret, now emerged into the open, their members proudly proclaiming their allegiance to their new masters. Entire cities fell without a fight, their leadership and populace either too terrified to resist or too eager to join the winning side. But not all despaired. For many, the revelation was a clarification. The formless, creeping dread now had a face. The enemy was known. And in the face of this ultimate evil, the forces of the light, fractured and demoralized as they were, finally found a reason to unite. They needed a leader, a symbol to rally behind. The Hall of the Servants, in its last act of unified authority, turned to the one man who had been warning of this danger from the beginning, the most powerful and trusted Aes Sedai left in the world. Luz Therin Telemon. They granted him the title of the Dragon, the leader of the armies of the light, and gave him unprecedented authority to fight the war. Luz Therin accepted the burden. He stood before the remnants of their broken world, his heart filled with a sorrow so deep it was a physical pain, and he called for all who still believed in the light to stand with him. The lines were now drawn, not on a map, but across the soul of humanity itself. Friend against friend, family against family. The choice was absolute. You stood with the dragon against the dying of the light, or you knelt before the Forsaken and the coming of the night. The idyllic age of peace was a forgotten dream. The perfect world, broken by a single act of intellectual arrogance and rotted from within by the whispers of a patient evil, now stood on the brink of the abyss. The one power, the force of creation, was being turned into the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. The shimmering cities, built for art and peace, were about to become battlegrounds. The long, beautiful summer of the Age of Legends was over. The terrible, bloody winter of the War of Power had arrived.